moment. Almost always works. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Before I introduce today's fabulous guest, I do want to thank Amy for this amazing hat that she sent me. I love it so much. Thank you. You did not include your email for me to thank you, but you did include your address, so I can do it the old-fashioned way and write you a note. So my guest today, I was supposed to meet at the GI Health Summit and then that got postponed, but luckily we're meeting today. Her name is Natalie Castro. She's a registered dietitian and specializes a bit in gut health as well. She is on the team of Planted Forward, the fabulous virtual telemedicine organization that was founded by Dr. Vanessa Mendez, who's been on the show. So she can do consults and she'll talk about how. But first, we're going to get to know her a little bit, and please welcome her to the show. It's nice to meet you.
Hi, so nice to meet you guys, and thank you, Chef AJ, for having me on. Super excited because it's all about gut health, and Dr. Mendez is amazing. We connected a couple of years ago, and our stories just kind of aligned with being super passionate for helping patients and helping connect diet with the treatment towards digestive issues.
It's so funny. I didn't mean to interrupt, but it's so funny how like I'll hear from people who have just all kinds of GI problems and said, "Oh, my GI doctor said it doesn't matter what I eat," and I'm like, "Really, really?"
Exactly. So imagine my surprise as a registered dietitian who, speaks all about diet, to finally find a doctor who speaks the same language. And it's just so nice to be able to work hand in hand with a physician who understands the role that diet has, because it's crazy to me to think that there's still so many physicians that don't believe that diet can influence health. And then, health is one thing, but then the GI tract in itself is another whole other topic that we can really dive into.
That's the thing. I could maybe, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a specialty in medicine where they could ostensibly say it doesn't matter what you eat. I don't know, but like gut, really? Like that's where the food goes, people.
I mean, we could even argue, okay, maybe like bone health, somebody with a broken bone, but then what about your, knees and being overweight, like carrying extra weight, and there's still room for conversation there. Yeah. So definitely we need to be more open in the medical community.
Well, we're going to have to change the paradigm. Yesterday, the doctor that was on is a lifestyle medicine doctor saying, "Why didn't anybody tell me this?" And I know people that their oncologists say, "Oh yeah, you have cancer, just eat whatever you want." And well, we think differently, but I'm curious, Natalie, what came first? Were you a plant eater first and then became a registered dietitian, or the other way around?
Well, funny, I'll go even further back. So I myself, and I don't mind sharing my own personal journey. So I always, not always, but in high school, I was really passionate about, I think it was in health class that, they start teaching you stuff. And I was like, that's interesting. And then growing up, I just, as a typical teenager, wanted to do the latest and greatest trend that was going on, and you're reading the magazines. But I always noticed that there was this confusion out there. There was always like two sides to everything, or one day something was good, another day something wasn't good, or the headlines read. So I just kind of put it in myself and said, I want to be the one to help people find the answers, like what is the truth here. And that's really where my passion in nutrition started. So I started down that journey, and when I was in college, I actually got diagnosed with inflammatory bowel disease and celiac disease. So it was kind of a triple whammy, because I was told I had 3 different conditions at a very young age, and nobody else in my family had it. So I was already in school for nutrition, and somehow my GI doctor at the time actually did say maybe I should see a dietitian. And I was like, well, I'm actually in school to be a dietitian. And it just kind of, happened that way, where I was able to then take my studies and really apply it specifically to learn more about the disease process and how you can use food to cure your gut. So then in that journey, because even in school as a dietitian, you learn about everything, and not specifically, plant-based, even though, there's good research and everything out there, it's not something that's still pushed on to everybody, right? So my journey with plant-based probably started about 10 years ago, where after a flare-up, I just, didn't want to be on medications, and I wanted to be able to be in full control over my disease states and just be able to use food as medicine. So, and that's really where the research, started to blossom even more. And that's, it became a bigger focus to really eliminate any animal proteins.
It's so funny that you're literally the fifth registered dietitian I've met that sort of was the case. They had something like celiac, and then they were so interested in healing themselves that they said, I'd like to help others with this.
Yep. Yeah, and it's crazy because with celiac disease, that's really where it started to for me to branch out to reaching the community. In Miami, where I live, when I was diagnosed 20 something years ago, there was no products to be purchased. So with celiac disease, the diet is the only treatment. So a gluten-free diet is the only way to treat celiac disease. So at that time, this was way back when, health food stores were the only place to get like specialty foods. It wasn't commonplace to be able to find them in a regular grocery store. So the products that were available were horrible at the time, and didn't taste well at all. Like, it was just better to be naturally gluten-free, where you didn't have to buy specialty breads and stuff. And so actually, when I went to grad school in New York, so close to Canada, they had a lot of products come in, and I found a support group up there because in Miami, there was just no resources. And when I realized the support how helpful it was to be able to do that, I decided when I moved back to Miami to start a group. So I run the gluten-free support group for Miami with the gluten intolerance group. And that's, where it started to be able to branch out and give back to the community, just because it is so hard to find those resources and feel connected to people that are going through the same thing that you are.
Nice. Did you learn anything about plant-based diets in RD school?
Yes, definitely. But again, it wasn't such a huge, until you make that connection where you realize, wow. So we know that vegetables as dietitians, it's something that people don't eat enough of, and we're trying to always push. But why not push it even stronger? Because we know that it's already a limited resource as far as what gets on the table and on the plate for people to consume. So it's just a matter of being able to realize it for yourself. So I think what happens with a lot of physicians and dietitians that perhaps don't recommend a plant-based diet is because they themselves have struggled to figure out how to make their own diet more plant-based. So, because of the culture that we've had for years of an animal-based high protein diet, it's very difficult for people to make that mind change. And I think that's the limitation that we have as a medical community, because you hear physicians who fight. I work in healthcare as well, and I work on food policy. So I wear many different hats, and one of them is changing the food environment within our healthcare system. And there's so many physicians that are threatened by the fact that we want to promote plant-based. And so we have a completely plant-based menu for in our dining rooms for our patients and guests. And there's people that will fight against it because they believe in the keto diet or, the paleo diet, whatever animal based diet they're currently promoting. But it's interesting.
Wow. When did you first hear of a plant-based diet?
I mean, it's always been there from the beginning. So since the beginning of my studies.
Since the beginning of time, really.
Yeah. I mean, yes. So we've always, and then what's interesting though, at the very, starting school, you always, it was more the vegan diet. And I think now, with it being more plant forward, plant based, there it kind of opens up the door a little bit more to people, for people to start trying things, knowing that if you just increase the amount of plant foods that you're having, and that's where I was saying the difference between just having a side of vegetables or adding, lettuce in your hamburger, that doesn't count, but at least there's something there, but not enough, right? So we have to really, as dietitians, go above and beyond to promote even more plant foods.
Yeah. Well, I know that you recently had a baby, and I'm curious, I'm guessing your baby's plant-based now, because I mean, unless I guess maybe breast milk isn't plant-based, but you know what I mean. And are you planning on raising her that way? And did you have a plant-based pregnancy?
I did. It was very easy. And so I guess that's where I was going with talking about veganism, that at the beginning, there was a lot of worry that perhaps patients and individuals weren't getting enough nutrients on a vegan diet, and that's not the case. So for years already now, the Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics has shown the evidence and support that a completely plant-based diet is safe for all stages of life, including pregnancy and infancy. That's how I will raise my daughter, and I had no issues during my pregnancy.
That's fantastic. Did you find that the plant-based diet, I know that maybe it's not directly related to celiac, but did you find that it helped your gut at all? And maybe you felt better, felt different?
Well, definitely. So the reason why we recommend a plant-based diet, especially for digestive issues, is because of all the protective factors that we know about it, right? So a plant-based diet is super high in short chain fatty acids, which are what helps protect the lining of our intestines. So we want to prevent things like leaky gut. And you'll hear a lot about leaky gut, especially with celiac disease and with many chronic conditions and autoimmune diseases. So why do these things come into our immune system? It's because the lack of support that we have, or the leaky gut that occurs. And basically that's our intestinal wall has the gut barrier. And there's basically, it can look like this. It can have holes in it where food can go through, or pathogens can pass through the gut barriers. And this is where having a high plant-based diet will help be more protective, right? So all of the plant polyphenols and all of the short chain fatty acids that we're going to be getting from them.
Like, how can just regular people, maybe that don't have a diagnosis at this point, use plant foods to heal their gut? Because what happens, Natalie, is a lot of time people that are new to this say, oh, every time I eat, like especially cruciferous vegetables, oh, I get so bloated, or beans, and then they give up eating these healthy foods.
Exactly. So this is where it all starts. And this is what I do when I work with my patients, because unfortunately, yes, some people want to jump right in and start eating a huge kale salad that they've, again, they went from a romaine or iceberg lettuce, that one little leaf, onto something, and then suddenly they're eating a huge bowl of vegetables that they haven't eaten. So it's going to be a huge shock to the digestive system, even if you don't have digestive issues. So what I always recommend is starting in steps, right? So it doesn't mean that you can't be completely plant-based from one day to another. However, what we want to do is start to introduce food. So when I work with patients, what I do is I help them identify what are those easy to digest foods, and we start in a transitional phase. So we introduce food slowly and transition into graduating to more advanced, harder to digest foods.
Maybe, do you have like a continuum, like what are some of the easier ones to digest and some of the more difficult ones to digest?
Yeah, so something like, so an example of a start food. So first of all, and then this could be, so let me start with the example. So it would be something like cooked carrots, boiled potatoes, and tofu. Again, you can season it in many different ways, but these would be easier to digest foods, and it would be completely balanced. You have your carbohydrates, your fiber, and your protein in there. And so there, what we'll end up doing is transitioning them forward. So with somebody who has a lot of digestive issues, breaking them down, so cooking them well or blended forms of food. So an example would be, instead of starting with chickpeas raw, that would be like a graduate, what I call a graduate level. We would start with something like hummus, which is, blended mechanically outside of the body, so that when it introduces down to the digestive system, it's been easier to digest. And this really helps anybody with chronic inflammation in the intestines, right? Because imagine the intestines are already inflamed. So to do that extra mechanical breakdown is extra labor for the body. So if you're introducing it in a blended form already, it's just going to be a little bit easier to accept. The other trick is in small amounts. So like I was saying, if you introduce a really large amount of food, the body has to accept it. It hasn't seen this food before, so it's kind of like a shock. So imagine a huge kale salad with quinoa and all this great stuff, but something that somebody has never eaten before. Of course, they're going to experience something. The body is like, hey, hold on, I have to pull out of storage all of these digestive enzymes that I haven't used, and start, breaking this food down. So again, very healthy. It's just there's ways and steps to be able to get there.
Thanks. Do you have a food philosophy that you generally share with patients?
Well, definitely using food as medicine. So I believe that, what we put in our body, so we have control over what we're putting into our body and the way our body can utilize that. So in some cases, when you have a chronic condition, there's, the disease is going to have its process. However, we can still help it out, right? So what we're putting in, we have to digest, we have to break down, we have to metabolize. So if we take a look and we're eating a whole food, plant-based diet, non-processed, we're eliminating any additional stuff that can be causing inflammation in the system. So, somebody can get a diagnosis of cancer. So yes, cancer is going to have its process. However, if we're trying to treat the body with and feed it with the right nutrients, then our outcomes could be potentially so much better than just saying, oh well, it's here. Let me just throw my hands up and not be able to continue to eat it. So in that case, I truly believe that we can control that sense, because the environment around us is what it is. Unfortunately, a lot of our food is already tainted with chemicals and processes, but we can clean it up by looking for those cleaner ingredients.
We have a question from a live viewer asking, do you recommend fermented foods?
Oh, definitely. So fermented foods are excellent, because again, they're going to be feeding that micro biota and just really keeping it healthy. So something that causes disturbance so going back to the leaky gut is that we can have this imbalance of microorganisms in our intestines. So we have good and bad ones. We want to have a good balance of both, where sometimes what happens with a lot of patients that have a lot of gas, a lot of bloating, too much constipation and diarrhea, indigestion, these are things that can be leading because there isn't enough fiber in the diet, or just a typical Western diet that is high in low in fiber and high in fried foods and processed foods. So if we have this imbalance of bacteria, then that's where all these symptoms start to come into play. So the fermented foods, what it does, it helps feed the good bacteria. So we want to keep those good microorganisms within the intestines to keep thriving.
That makes sense. So do you work with people virtually only, in person, or a combination?
So thanks to one of the things to thank COVID for is that this remote access, right, that now suddenly is well accepted and kind of a new way of life. So for the last 2 years, I've been working virtually, and that's helped me. That's given the opportunity for me to work with patients privately and be able to help them on their journey. So I do see them virtually.
Nice. And how does that work, and how do they make an appointment? And tell us a little bit about Planted Forward, because I know you're not the only wonderful practitioner there.
Yeah, so it's a team that we have Planted Forward. We have a gastroenterologist, Dr. Vanessa Mendez, a cardiologist, lifestyle medicine doctor, and another dietitian, and as well as a health coach. So all of us practice and believe in using plants to heal the body and to thrive. And we can all see patients virtually. So we, on our website, the Planted Forward, you can make an appointment with any of our practitioners, and it's nationwide. So we can, many of us have different licenses in different states, and they're all listed on the website. So we can, you can make an appointment through there.
Do you know what states you're able to see patients in, and are all 50 states covered? And what about if somebody lives outside of the United States?
Yeah, so I believe I have about 12 states that I can see patients in. I can't list them off the top of my head, but they are on the website. For sure, Florida and California, New York, but they are listed on there. I can see international patients as well, and Canadian patients.
That's fantastic. That's really cool. And what other specialties do you have there? Is it just registered dietitian and GI, or are there other specialties as well?
Yeah, so cardiovascular and lifestyle medicine, so general health.
That's very cool. Let's see if you guys have any. You know what? This is a question, and we're not just asking you this because you're a registered dietitian. Almost every guest that comes on, even like if they're an author of something not even plant-based, people seem to want to know what you eat in a day and what you do for exercise. Give us some inspiration.
Yeah, so these days it's been very interesting with exercise because it's like trying to sneak in anytime that I can with the baby. But definitely some yoga and meditation is so needed, with like even deep stretching. It's very interesting to know, to see how much we hold on to on our body without stretching, especially if you're sitting all day and not having any release of that. So even just some stretching can help, but that's definitely something that I do every day. And then that also just that deep breathing to be able to have that relaxation. But love walking and running. Before baby, I was a runner. So I can't wait to get back out there and start running regularly again. So that's what I do for exercise. And for a moment in time there, I was also doing weightlifting, so some CrossFit as well, which was always fun to share at the box with all of my friends there that were huge, protein pushers and animal proteins. And I'll be like, look at me lifting all this heavy weight with my plant-based. So that's always fun to share. But definitely exercise is part of my lifestyle. And then as far as what I love to eat, I actually wanted to tell you that today I tried black salt for the first time. I couldn't source it locally. So I finally found it online and ordered it. And I was like, you know what, I need to try this. But I like to think of my food philosophy in the kitchen as whatever I can find in the refrigerator and throw it together. My husband's always like, what are you cooking? I'm like, food. Because I don't necessarily follow any kind of recipes. I just go off of taste. But always making sure that they're nutritiously balanced with some kind of vegetable protein and some high complex carbohydrate.
Nice. Do you ever use the Instant Pot? That's my favorite.
Here and there. I do for beans. So I do use it regularly, but I haven't explored too many dishes with the Instapot. I actually had a really hard time with my Instapot when I first got it. I don't know why. I don't know if it's just me, but I had to like look up online the manual because it just wasn't as user-friendly as I had hoped.
Oh, that's funny. Well, I have lots of videos. I could teach you if you want. I know there's a lot of buttons that make it confusing. So I just use one button called the manual button. It makes it easy.
And then it just, yeah. So I think that's what it's been, the process. I figured out how to do my beans, and then I'm like, okay, I'm good. But I would love to make yogurt and stuff. So I definitely have to look up some of your videos.
Absolutely. I haven't done a yogurt one. And people are asking how to make an appointment with Planted Forward. And I put it in the show notes, but people that watch on Facebook, they don't see everything. That's why I prefer when people watch on YouTube. But I am putting it in the chat right now, the link, if people want to.
Oh, perfect. Yes, because that is the best way. It's clicking on the link right there. You join in through our patient portal. And all of our availability shows automatically. So you could just select the next available appointment time and date, and we'll get you set up.
Yeah, there's a question. Black salt, is that the one that's kind of sulfury? People said it's tastes like eggs.
Yeah, so I was super impressed with how it tasted. And there's actually some several health benefits attached with it. You know, again, with a lot of things like you don't want to load up on anything that is there, but adding a little bit goes a long way.
Oh, great. We can see some questions in the chat. For example, from Brenda, what foods help with inflammation? I'm going to guess it's something in the plant kingdom.
Definitely. So again, it's those fibrous foods, the ones we want to focus on, but all kinds of vegetables. One of the I think the biggest take home for inflammation is that you want to strive to get a variety of different plant foods throughout the day. So sometimes we end up focusing on, I tell my patients this all the time, when you're going grocery shopping, you go and you buy the exact same foods over and over every week. So take advantage of the produce aisle and explore different options. Be seasonal. Look for things that are on sale, because those tend to be the seasonal products because they're, ripening fast. So you want to grab those. But take a look and change it up every week. Try something different and see what you haven't had. Explore at least one new item that maybe you're not familiar with, and then Google an amazing recipe for it. Because you'll be surprised with how many different diverse foods you can actually get. So we recommend, it might sound like a lot, but if you can have more than 30 plant-based foods per day, it would be a great goal to strive for. So if you start counting, you might find yourself that you're actually pretty close if you're completely plant-based, but it's changing the diversity. So then imagine everything that we're eating is feeding that gut microbiome. So you want to have different options in there instead of always the same exact thing.
That makes sense. Deanna wants to know, is kombucha good for the gut?
So, I love that question. So there's a lot of foods out there that are a little confusing, just like everything. But kombucha, so it is a fermented tea. However, especially the ones on the market, they're loaded in sugar. So they're not good for our gut health. It's just kind of like if you take a look at the traditional yogurt aisle, even though it's dairy options, it's kind of like the industry heard that we said that yogurt might be good because it has probiotics in it, or it's a fermented product. So what did they do? They started making all of these different types and adding all of these additives, all of these sugars. And then they went with artificial sugars to make it, fat-free and all of this fancy stuff. So at the end of the day, what I'm trying to say is that it's not good for the gut, because it just has a bunch of extra stuff. So kombucha can be the same way because it's just really high in sugar. So if you can make your own fermented tea, more power to you, because that always looks interesting to make. But that would be the best way around it, or looking for one that doesn't have a lot of sugar. And if you do have some, just watch the portion sizes, because a lot of these bottles are really large. So I ran into a patient who was drinking like 3 a day, and she was in terrible pain because she was just so incredibly bloated and gassy, and started developing other issues because she heard that drinking kombucha was a good thing. So it just can be very confusing when you start trying stuff that's out there.
Yeah, and it's so expensive for one bottle. It's a very expensive addiction.
Yes. When, and sadly, how often do people try it because they're like, oh, I heard it's good. So they're spending the money, and then they end up getting more sick, and for being misled. So that's very unfortunate.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw a question here. Where did it go? It was about grains, but here's one though. Can you talk about sprouting seeds? Like, is it better to eat nuts and seeds sprouted?
So it is. The benefit of sprouting is that basically you start to develop a little plant within this amazing powerhouse already. So whenever the seeds are basically all of the nutrients that the plant can have. So when you're talking about microgreens and sprouted grains, then this is going to be all of the best of the best of that food. So if you can sprout your beans and your grains, that's excellent. It's not a necessary, like if you're not able to source them and you can't get them, then eating the actual, like lentils, for example, you can get them sprouted or you can get regular lentils. If you can get lentils, that's excellent. If you can sprout them, even better. So there's going to be a lot of additional benefit to eating them, but it doesn't mean that you should only eat sprouted.
Thanks. Tracy says, how long should we expect it to take to fix a 50-year SAD diet gut? How long until you're absorbing your nutrients fully?
Oh, the SAD diet. So sad. So the SAD diet stands for, the standard American diet, being, high in that processed foods, high in sugars, high in fats, or unhealthy fats, right? And low in fiber. So once you start increasing your fiber, I have worked with patients who, especially like patients that are have really bad IBS symptoms. What I like to do is work them down to what I call ground zero. If we get down to ground zero, clean up the diet and try to just provide clean foods, within 2 weeks, we could start to see an improvement in symptoms. And, it depends on the person, right? How strict they are to committing to not introducing anything else but those clean items. So it can be that quick. One of the beauties about our mucosal lining is that it responds quickly to change. It's just a matter of consistency. So if you continue to do that, then you can start to see improvements in different items. So people, everything is a trickle effect. Everything is connected. So you might be experiencing stomach issues, but then you didn't realize that you had these terrible headaches, or this fogginess, and then that starts to clear up. Or maybe it was bad acne. So, the acne might not go away in 2 weeks, but it's going to start to lead you to that road to recovery.
That is great. Let's see. Okay. Leah says, even after eating a plant-based diet for over a decade, some foods still cause me severe bloating and pain, especially after smoothies. Should I be seeing a doctor, or is this normal?
Yeah. And you know what? I'm glad she brought up smoothies, because that's one of the other introductory foods. A way to do introductory foods is through smoothies. However, not all smoothies are created equal. So where I was talking about the mechanically broken down outside of the body, this is where you could put some ingredients into a blender and blend them up, and that could be an easy way to digest them. So it's a great way to start introducing some greens if you haven't done that already, especially for children that maybe parents want to introduce more nutrition in there. That's another way to get it in. So what could be happening with this a person who's asking the question? I apologize, I didn't catch the name. But what you want to do is check to see the ingredients. So this reminds me of what happens with people with IBS and feeling that gas, bloating, and just symptoms. So what can occur is that there's a combination of foods that can be causing an imbalance as well. So sometimes what happens is we're having way too many of the sugars found naturally, even though there might be all plant-based foods and all good foods, sometimes the balance is too much. So in a lot of these smoothie places, they love to throw in like dates, for example, as a sweetener. So dates are great, but they're very rich. So I've heard of, smoothies with like calling for like 3 dates. Somebody told me this morning actually about a recipe that had oat flour and beans and dates. And she was trying to get every kind of like plant food in there. And wow, this smoothie sounded like, of course you're going to have GI issues because it was just way too much. So there's just a right balance to be able to do it. A smoothie that it's like kind of my go-to, just to give you an example, there's going to be something like a not so ripe banana. So with a little bit of the green tip, the riper the banana, then that's going to be more sugar that's hitting the intestines. Again, good sugars, and we can use that to our advantage, but you want to use something that isn't so ripe, just to kind of help balance things out, because you're going to be adding other things. So one small banana, because the size of banana also matters, a tablespoon of natural peanut butter. We can add in like a cup of spinach and some plant-based milk, some ice, and voila, that is your smoothie. And then adding some additives, like maybe some hemp seeds for extra protein, some ground up flaxseed in there would be nice as well. So it's very simple, the ingredients that can go in there, and that would be an easier to digest smoothie. So I'm not sure exactly what was in your smoothie, but that could be a factor, is what are the ingredients and how you're combining the different foods.
Makes sense. Thank you. Terry says, do you believe olive oil is healthy, and what about nuts? If so, how much for someone who is underweight?
So for somebody who's underweight, we're definitely looking for nutrient-dense ingredients, right? So our nutrient-dense options are going to be things like nuts, avocado. We're going to make things like maybe an oatmeal bowl and adding some of those nut butters in there, some of the flaxseed, things that will up the calories. So things that are going to be higher in calories. It doesn't have to be this crazy amount of fat. So I caution against, a lot of usage of like coconut oil, for example. You want to keep things in moderation. So olive oil, just a little bit, maybe like in a salad dressing, it has a place in there, or it could have a place in there, but not necessarily something that you just have to douse your food into, right? So I once had somebody tell me she gained she was overweight, but she put on extra weight because she heard olive oil was so healthy that she was just like sprinkling it all over her food before eating it. I'm like, no. So it's just a matter of how we do things. So when we're talking about like a salad, the reason why traditionally olive oil is used on salad is so that it has some kind of fat to absorb the water nutrients that are in our salad ingredients. It doesn't have to be oils. It could be things like some seeds or some nuts. Again, that's going to give you some more calories and some good nutrients in there as well.
Nice. Thank you. Let's see. If I know there were I saw a question about grains and I don't know where it is. Yeah. Sorry about that.
Oh, no problem.
Your question, but I know I wish I could find it because there's lots of people there talking in the chat. But one thing about grains is that if somebody truly has celiacs, then even grains that, like, for instance, oats, I always hear about oats. Oats are technically not glutinous, but people that true celiacs have to source them to be gluten-free, right?
Yes, and it's so confusing, especially now. I think they made it even worse from when I was first diagnosed. But I can talk about grains in general. So just to see if we covered the question that might have come up as well. So grains, we want to try to get, again, our whole grains. So when we're talking about like a lot of people fear white rice versus whole like wild rice. So there's a difference there. In white rice, we take off the bran, we take off the fiber, and it's digested a lot faster, the carbohydrate. So the more fiber that the product has, or the food has, the better it is for us to metabolize it and to slow down that rate of insulin spikes that we could have with our food. So as far as digestion, again, it's going to be good to have the higher fiber sources. What we want to do is make sure they're cooked well so that we can incorporate them in, right? And we always want to make sure that we're cooking our food. So there's also confusion out there as far as like raw foods and all these different diets like that are basically out there floating around with information that can confuse people. So as far as the grains, we want to include things like as far as for help better digestion. So we have our brown rice, our wild rice. We have things like quinoa would be great, and also the oats that you mentioned. So oats, what happens is that they're naturally gluten-free, but when they're harvested in the field and we pick them up with the machines, they're usually next to oats. Next to wheat. So we are picking up the wheat along with it. And so it's just a cross-contamination that happens. So we've looked at different Quaker oats, and they've done different sampling of them, of different oatmeals that are out there, and they always find a high amount of gluten in the products. So even though there isn't any gluten, and you can find this in beans too, unfortunately, when you sort through your dry beans, there's usually different grains or different I've found barley, I have found all kinds of things in my beans. So that's something that somebody with celiac disease should be really aware of, that it's very easy to have cross contamination within the products. So that's the difference between the oats. Yeah, so now, like, for example, there's some products out there that they're using kind of like a shuffling so that they can take out some of the extra wheat that might be found in there. But unfortunately, they're still finding that when they batch test some of these products, there's still some gluten in there. So they might be labeled gluten-free. So some of like the General Mills products ran into the issue. I think it was Cheerios that had run into that issue. And unfortunately, yeah, you just have to be careful with some of those oats. So always, for somebody with celiac disease, looking for the certified gluten-free oats. And that basically is indicating that they're coming from a field that they're not growing any wheat. So there's no chance for them to harvest oats with wheat.
Thank you for the distinction. So my understanding is if you have celiacs, you have to make sure it's certified, but if you're avoiding gluten for whatever other reasons, maybe not as important.
Correct.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Perfect. Somebody's
Unfortunately,
asking.
it could still get complicated, but I don't know if anybody has questions on that. But
Yeah.
yes, because
Well,
we
that's
run
something
into.
like if somebody, that would be a great thing for like a consultation where you can really dive deep into this, because I know it's very patient specific.
Right, right. And so, yeah. And then the difference would be somebody who's trying to like discover if they have celiac disease. Because now that a lot of the diets are kind of promoting against gluten-free, against gluten, a lot of people have eliminated gluten. So then they're not sure if gluten is their trigger or not. So then how strict should they be, right? Just like you mentioned. But then at this point, in order to get fully treated or diagnosed with celiac disease, there has to be a presence of gluten in order for the test to detect it, and to be able to get that diagnosis. So it's becoming a little bit of an issue right now because so many people have gone gluten-free.
Right. People are asking, what do you recommend? How many grams of fiber should we get per day? Is 30 enough?
Great question. So definitely striving for 30. If you're already at 30 and you want to go higher, that's where I recommend counting how many different plants you're eating per day. So if you're getting that diversity, then you're doing excellent. And getting it from the actual foods versus any kind of like fiber supplement. So 30 is the goal. The general diet is very low in fiber, about 15 grams or less. So if you're hitting 30, you're doing great. And if you want to go higher, just, watching how much you're having, you don't go too crazy with, as long as your digestion is good and you're feeling like you're going, so we should be going to the bathroom every day, right? And having regular bowel movements. But if you're like running into the bathroom with diarrhea and stuff, then that's where you want to kind of check things out, and make sure you're keeping everything in balance.
Great. Leanne says, well, how do you have 30 different types of fruits and vegetables a day when you have food allergies? Is that something you can work with people on, Natalie? Food allergies, intolerances, sensitivities?
Yep, definitely. So, and then keep in mind that all plant foods, so that would be your grains, it's going to be your beans, your nuts, your seeds, and then you have your vegetables and your fruits. So just changing it up so that you're not having, salad 3 times a day, that you're changing the variety of different greens. So it could be romaine lettuce, it could be chard, it could be kale. So you're having those different options. It could be bok choy, instead of those same things. So it just give it a try. I'm curious to see, how many you get. And then let's say you hit 10. So then maybe tomorrow you try 11, or next week, so there you can just kind of adjust, but it would be interesting to see how many you end up getting.
Nice. People are saying if you could speak a little bit about the low FODMAP diet.
Definitely. So low FODMAPs, one of the things that to be very cautious with is that just yesterday, I had a patient who told me she did low FODMAPs for like 3 years. No. This is not how we use the low FODMAPs. So low FODMAPs basically is an acronym for lactose, fructose, fructans, the galactose, and the polyose. So it's just I know lots of words, but basically all foods categorize into these columns. And there's certain, so you can find, there's all these lists online of how the foods categorize. And the bigger ones are going to be things like dairy, onions, what am I forgetting? Honey or sweeteners, like agave is another one. And that agave is always like listed as a healthy food for some reason, but very high in the fructose. And we also have things like even the beans. So we say that beans are good for us, but then they could be a trigger for some people on the low FODMAPs. So this is where we start with something like lentils and small amounts, so that you end up at categorizing what foods, where they fall into, and which foods are okay to start with and keep in, and which ones are really high that could be trigger foods. And usually what I find with most of my patients that have an issue are going to be things like onions. And what's interesting is that onions are in a lot of plant-based foods for flavor. So when somebody's gone vegan, they suddenly get this, they could possibly get this attack because now they're just eating more of a certain FODMAP that could be causing an issue. So what I have found when I work with patients is that we eliminate certain things, rebalance everything, and then they're able to reintroduce. So whenever you're trying a low FODMAPs, you should be working with a registered dietitian who's aware of how to get you through this process so that you can reintroduce the foods. So you shouldn't, be stuck, not eating, eliminating, all these foods and not being able to go back to a normal eating pattern.
Great, thank you. Karen says, is it okay to eat fruits and veggies together, either in smoothies or salads? I've gotten different opinions from different nutritionists.
Yeah, so it can be confusing. And there's a lot, again, out there where people think that, you can't mix foods together. Again, if you're having an issue with a certain ingredient, it could be a problem. But if you are having, like, for example, a salad that has a couple of strawberry slices in there, that shouldn't cause any issue. And there's nothing in the research to show that we cannot combine foods because our bodies are pretty sophisticated enough to be able to digest the foods and break it down. To the point where we used to think, even on the vegan diet way back when I started school, they said, oh, you have to have complementary proteins, and the only way to absorb protein is if you have the rice and the beans together, and that's not necessarily the case anymore. We know now that as long as we get it in throughout the day, that we're good. So it kind of reminds me of this a little bit, where there's a lot of school of thought to think that it has to be one way or another, but our digestion is able to break things down. It's just a matter of the correct balance. So if you're having a very, a lot of fruit and you start to throw like a bunch of honey or agave or something on top of it, that can throw off the level of how much fructose you just had and give you digestive issues. So it's just a matter of really being able to break things down. And I know it's difficult as an individual who you're just like trying to eat different foods, but if you feel like you're having ongoing issues, this is where I think it's a red flag for you to reach out and talk to a registered dietitian. And I also stress just being able to find one who understands and dedicates their career to digestive health, because unfortunately, I've heard also many patients come back to me, especially through my support group, that they went out to see a dietitian and they knew more about the gluten-free diet than they did, than the dietitian. So that's unfortunate, but that does happen, right? Just like when we go to physicians who might not be aware of plant-based. So you want to find somebody you can relate with and that can understand and listen to what you're going through.
How does one get in your support group?
So it's open to the community. We try to be local because we're basically talking about what is happening locally, what restaurants and stuff like that. So they're held at the local hospital, the Baptist Health, and they can find the information on my website, actually.
Right, and I put your website in the show notes. So if you're watching on Facebook, hop on over to YouTube, because that's where the show notes are. You mentioned finding somebody that really understands this issue. So the next question from Leah, I would really recommend she has a private consult with you, because we covered this a lot in the GI Health Summit that aired in November. But she said, what if you still suffer IBS symptoms even after eating plant foods for over a decade? Gas, pain, horrible.
Yes. So again, it's going to be that balance. Sometimes we think we're doing everything perfect, and then it's just that combination. And it just needs a little tune-up, a little tweak here and there. And I have found that working with my patients, that's what we've been able to do. And luckily, the symptoms improve. So again, it's nothing that you're doing, purposely wrong. It's just a matter of getting it done correctly.
Great. Okay. So this question, I really appreciate this question from Susan, because I always hear this from people like Dr. Goldhammer, but I also never knew why. She said, why is nutritional yeast not recommended for people with Crohn's? Because I have heard that over and over.
I have looked into this myself because I can't get to the bottom of it as to why, the studies are a little bit inconclusive. It's suggested that perhaps there could be some linkage there. So what I've done with my patients and with myself is it's been kind of trial and error. If you don't experience any symptoms or have any connection, then it should be fairly safe because nothing is occurring. If you feel that you don't want to have it in your diet, then it's something that there's ways around it. Like an example is usually there's a recipe for plant-based mac and cheese, and using that nutritional yeast for flavoring. But then there's ways to make it without it, right? So you could just eliminate it and use a little more carrots and a little more turmeric, and you can get to the same flavor or similar flavor. But yes, it's unfortunately one of those things that we don't have a firm answer on whether it does or doesn't create an issue. But I have a lot of patients who would rather steer on the side of caution, right? And just not introduce it into the diet.
Yeah, that makes sense. I actually have a cheese sauce recipe on my YouTube channel where I'm not using it because I find I can have a little bit too much. I find it does. I don't have Crohn's, but I find there's something about it that kind of it never feels right in my gut. Like I'm not really sure what it is, but I know people love it. They're practically addicted to it. People use a lot of it that use it usually.
Yeah, so it's exactly that. You have to listen to your body. There's a couple of products on the market that I have run into issues with as well. A couple of like egg substitute products that as soon as I taste it, I get some kind of reaction. I'm like, you know what? I don't need this. So if you're experiencing anything like that, it's the exact same way. I know that we push it sometimes because, it's, it has vitamin B12 in it. Well, there's other ways to get vitamin B12. It doesn't have to be through nutritional yeast.
Right.
So
I think people just like the taste.
Yeah, no, exactly. So, but like we were saying, there's ways to make things, checking out your recipe, for example, that you can get around without having it.
I think there's something addictive about it, the way people like really, really like it when they like it. So you just to clarify, because there are a couple of questions in the chat, you didn't say 30 different plants a day. You said a week, didn't you?
So not necessarily. So if you want to count per day, it would be just to try to see if you can get 30 a day. But it doesn't have to be changed every single day because you already have a good diversity if you're already hitting the 30. But yes, if you can try that out, that would be an interesting experiment.
Nice. We get a lot of people, believe it or not, even on plant-based diets that eat a lot of fiber, but still have constipation. And Meredith is saying, is magnesium a good supplement to help with elimination?
It is. I mean, it's something that has shown to help. However, not necessarily needed I wouldn't promote to have it. First, I would make sure that you're having the right amount of fibers. Something that we both Dr. Mendez and I recommend is having some psyllium husk in the diet. So like you can throw it into a smoothie, and all natural, not anything with flavor or sweeteners of any kind, but you could just drink a little bit in your water, and it helps either bulk up the stool or help you be more regular.
Yeah, it's interesting how I didn't even realize until I hosted the GI Health Summit that there's this whole specialty of individuals called pelvic floor physical therapists that actually work on gut issues, like helping people with like a special massage. It was just so fascinating to learn about that.
Yes, and even like I always help my patient send my patients a link to different gas eliminating exercises. That there's just different stretches that you can do as well if you're suffering from like trapped gas and just painful pain after digestion, that it's just kind of stuck there instead of having to do any kind of over the counter stuff.
Right. One of the funniest things that I learned hosting the GI Health Summit was from one of the registered dietitians who also had celiac that practices at UCLA, saying that they actually sell charcoal underwear for people that have to fart in church.
Oh my goodness. And church specifically?
Well, it's just, I mean, well, because like if that was an example of a place where what if that's a place you probably wouldn't want to fart.
Right, where it's very quiet.
And I looked it up and it really is a thing,
Oh my gosh, they probably, the things that they come up with.
Isn't that funny? Well, you are just so knowledgeable and you seem like such a very, easy to talk to. I'd be a great person to have a consult with if I continue to have GI issues. So thank you so much for what you do and for all the wonderful people at Planted Forward. I know a few of them have been on and we have a few more of the doctors and practitioners coming out throughout the next month. So that will be nice to get to know you. And the links are there if people want to follow you on Instagram or check out your website. Or I've been kept posting the link for a private consult because a couple of questions were on medication and I felt like that's better to have a consult. You can't really give, that specific kind of medical advice
so please send them to me, and I can, if you guys want to find me on Instagram, I can respond to you through there as well. But any questions you have, let me know.
Absolutely. Well, it's so nice to meet you, Natalie.
Thank you, AJ. This was excellent. Thank you so much for having me on.
Oh, it was my pleasure. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Klaus Mitchell, the founder of Plant-Based News. Take care, Natalie. Bye-bye.
Bye.